this.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Cello Chat Part 2. And I just wanted to start, first of all, by welcoming you into my studio at Rice University in Houston. And to apologize for last week where we had a little snafu on our end about not quite getting all the questions as they were coming in. But we think we've got this all sorted out, and I'm really sorry if we missed your questions. So I'm going to start with a couple of the questions that came in that were dropped from last time. So first let's start with from Javier Martinez from the Caribbean, and he asks about if I could elaborate more on mental practicing. I'm a huge fan of mental practicing. And what this actually is study, thinking a lot about what it is that you want to do in your practicing. This can be true of playing scales. It can be true of any technical work that you're doing, but especially beneficial when you're thinking about performing certain pieces of music. So studying the score, and basically the easiest way of saying is asking questions of the score. Why G major? Why in 4/4? Why is this allegro vivace as opposed to allegro? Why? What are the important stylistic characteristics of the piece? In my experience in the Concord String Quartet, I played a lot of contemporary music and first performances by pieces that had not been recorded or ever played before. So there was no way for me to be able to study a recording of something. So we had to start looking at the score very carefully and asking questions about it. And so we were able to decide, is this piece more about color? Is it more about harmony? Is it more about pitch? And we would sometimes be able to delve into that and start finding the answers, and then certain kind of stylistic understanding would start to reveal then a way that we could start to delve into the piece a little bit more emphatically. But for me, what I do is what I call kitchen table work before I start a piece. Now, let's say it's a work that I'm playing an ensemble, either a sonata or a piece with string quartet or other kind of mixed ensemble. I'll sit there with the score and my part, and as I'm going through the score, I'll note key interesting things that I'm seeing in the score. Oh, this is a duet with the cello and the violin, and I'll write the cue line of the violin above that and ask myself, what's the relationship there? Or the texture clears out together and the cello has 5 beats of unaccompanied music, and I say I have to make that even more special. Going through and looking at the rhythmic underpinning of everything that goes on. And I will make note at that time of the things that are very tricky to do technically. Then when I come back, I actually do another round, this time just with my cello part, and I start putting in what I think are going to be good bowings and fingerings that will be addressing a lot of the technical concerns that I have. And I come up with a part that's pretty heavily notated before I've ever played it on the cello. So I thought I would show you an example of this, of the result of my mental practicing, which is a sonata by Hindemith written in 1948 that I played for the very first time this summer. And so the result of my kitchen table work would look something like this. Let me see, how does that look, James? Can you see it okay there? A little closer? You see the top of the page?
Yes.
Okay, so for example, I started asking myself questions about, well, let's see, this is in 6/4 with the tempo of about 84, 88 to the half bar. And I start looking, you can start to see, I've written the bowings and the fingerings, and and a couple of piano cues underneath here, very lightly, that shows where the piano is playing. And then I start looking at things that I thought were very interesting. And some of the things that I found in this opening had to do with the relationships of the pitches, where they're particularly like half steps here, perfect fourth here, that all those intervals started to mean something to me and started to open up ideas about ways that I could handle that expressively. So then I would start to look for what's the color of the sound. It's piano. There are a couple of hairpins that show where, and that it builds to the end to a mezzo forte. And so I start to play this in my mind and get a sense about what I want this to sound like. So even before I played it on the cello, I've developed a plan for what it's going to do. And so, for example, on the page, if you saw that, I had those half steps in the perfect fourth, half step here, half step here, perfect fourth. And then finally the half steps at the end. So all these sorts of things sort of started bringing me into the piece. Obviously, we'll go through the whole work this way, so I have an idea. This all came to me starting with when I was on tour a lot and spending time on airplanes when I didn't have time to actually practice that much. And so it was really, I couldn't believe how much work I could get done without the cello, and started opening up a new relationship that I had with doing that. Another way of looking at it is if you were building a house, you'd never start to do that if you didn't have a blueprint first. And of course, the architect works out as many of the problems as possible on the drawing board before the ground is ever disturbed to put in a foundation. So that's what I try to do with mental practicing. And even in the case of scales, I can actually practice scales slowly without the cello, just actually feeling my fingers and my bow connect with the string, and it activates my brain and my expectation at a higher level. And being able to hear that. Now, what we know from brain science is that when you are actually playing like this, that your motor cortex is actually working, so that the place in the brain that you can sort of see where the first finger, the third finger, the fourth finger are working would actually be firing, just as if you were actually playing. So this is a very dynamic and interesting thing. And I hope that answers a little bit more about the mental practicing. And then the next question that we dropped, was it's always a fight with tuning. What do you suggest for improving your tune? So this, I assume, is intonation, of course, is sort of central to what we do as musicians, because intonation as an idea comes from the verb to intone, or to give meaning to the music. And so to give meaning to it in the same way that I talked about with this Hindemith excerpt, it basically says, how do we find meaning in that? So intonation, not only for me, includes where you choose where the pitch is, but also the vibrato, also the color, also the nature of the sound all the way around. But you're asking some certain sort of very important practical questions about how do we hear? So one way to start thinking about this is, where are the resonances on the instrument? So certainly, if we're going to play a C on the G string, we might want that to be in tune with the low C string. Or this G with the G string, D with the D string, right? Then we might have perfect relationships within that. So how do we find the first finger in first position? Maybe to play a perfect fourth with the string above. So D with G. Now these perfect intervals are supposed to be right or wrong, right? So sometimes we then find larger fifth relations. For example, not just the octave, but maybe this F here and C there would be a perfect fourth, but much bigger interval. Now those are with open strings. But then we can also find this G and C. This G might be in tune here. Then that C would tell us that that is in tune there. So the fifths and fourths are good ways to be able to set things up. Then, of course, according to the acoustics, we have relationships of thirds and sixths. Sometimes the thirds are, both of the thirds and the sixths are what we would call qualitative intervals. So there's a, depending on its context, a third, if it's a harmonic third, might be a little lower, a major third. So if I'm playing an E with a C, a little lower is better. But that's a different E than the one that I've been tuning here. That also means that if we're playing in an ensemble, or we're playing something where in B flat or in E flat major or F major, and we have an open string as a harmonic third, sometimes we need to be able to put the fifth of that a little bit higher. So in terms of this E flat, but I might do this, if it's an E flat, it's just a little higher. With my E flat, it's the G lower. Or in the, if I'm playing B flat with an open D, ever so slightly higher B flat gives me a way of setting the basic example. You might find this also in the fourth suite, for example. Where you would put your E flat so that your open strings are ringing in an appropriate way all the way around. At the heart of all intonation is actually developing your ear to be able to be discerning about what is in tune and what's not in tune. Because basically, if you can hear it right, then you're going to be able to play it better. Your ear will start to tell you that it's right. So it has to do with an understanding of how you're training your ear, what you're expecting, and answering the question, do you know what it sounds like when it's in tune? I hope that's helpful. Okay, so now one more, and then we'll take the ones that are coming in now. How is your standard practice routine and your standard warm-up routine? This is from Licio Costa. Well, I'm a huge scale maven. I love playing scales. I find it is the most important way to be able to establish a relationship with the cello, and solving your technical problems, just feeling that wonderful kinesthetic pleasure of playing is fabulous. And basically, a lot of the work that you need to do can be done within the scales. So my basic warm-up routine is to play a major scale, a minor scale, 4 octaves, a scale in broken thirds, the major arpeggio, the minor arpeggio, the subdominant arpeggio, usually diminished and augmented, and then I'll do arpeggios and inversions, thirds and sixths, and then I do the dominant seventh arpeggio with an idea of going to the next thing. So I do all this in C major, and then the dominant in C, dominant 7, and then I'll go, that puts me into F major, and I just keep doing this as a circle of fifths going on through that, so F major, F minor, etc. Then I'll change strokes and do different kinds of things with that, and it's just a great way to do that. As a professor, and I'm so busy both teaching and getting things ready, my practice time sometimes is very hard to come by. I'll have 20 minutes here and 10 minutes there. So when I get to do my 20-minute warm-up workout, it's a great privilege, and I feel so much better when I get to do that. So now I think we're ready to take some questions from you that you're sending in for tonight. So James, what do we have?
Okay, first question, can you elaborate more on the fourth box suite?
Can I elaborate more on the fourth box suite? Well, yeah. I mean, we could talk about that or any of the other box suites for quite a long time. When you're looking at the whole body of the Bach suites, we start seeing, and many scholars have talked about this too, about how the Bach suites are really almost like one large work.
Oh, he specifically wants you to talk about the intonation.
But intonation in the fourth. Okay. All right. So then, if we're maybe then I'll skip this other large preamble, but about issues with the fourth suite. The tricky part about this from a technical point of view is, of course, the fact that we're in extended position as much as we are, and that we want to make sure that that is a sort of a physical issue, that we're always playing in tune, be able to hear that. As a matter of fact, I have a former colleague, Laszlo Varga, may he rest in peace, who thought that it was just too difficult to play this piece in E flat major, and he said it sounds so much better in G major, and he would play it in G major. And but I don't know, I'm still a great fan of the E flat. So when we are actually jumping around, one of the things, of course, is to be able to establish in these opening arpeggios in the prelude a given and a variable. So basically, if we have a metronome that may be able to play back a pitch and use that as a given, then we're able to play all the pitches in relationship to the given and be able to find out what are our tendencies about the variables, so that as you're able to work on that. So for example, let me see if I can do this. So that's an E flat from the tuner, and say I ask myself, is that in tune? Just found out is that my fifth, which has to be barred like this in order to be correct, I have to anticipate that as I'm crossing the strings. I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that, but basically going through and sort of looking for what your tendencies are and making appropriate compensations for that, so you're sort of starting to narrow the variables so you have more givens in your toolbox. After a while, when you're practicing with a drone like this, you can almost hear it when it's not there. And it really helps to sort of define those things that are there. Once you feel more comfortable with the pitch, you can start to feel how to be able to deal with that. I hope that answers your question about fourth suite and intonation issues. James?
Can you please explain a little bit about the use of the wrist versus the arm when we are dealing with different passages?
I assume that we're talking about the right wrist? Or
I think so, yeah. That would make sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the things when we're thinking about the physical side of our playing has to do with trying to create an intelligent interface between how the body works really well and how the bow and the cello really work well. And to try to get something that's simple and efficient that gets us to work well. So understanding the power that you get can't result in rigidity or tension, and we can't be so loose that we can't play with power. So those two things, strength and flexibility, have to be in harmony. Now, in the case of, this is answering your question, believe it or not. So basically, we want to make sure that we're activating the largest muscle group that we can in some way to be able to support all the smaller muscles, because we're more powerful and engaged if we can activate a small motion of a large muscle as opposed to too large of a motion with a small muscle. That's where we start having physical problems when we get there. So I like to think of the wrist, the right wrist, as being a conduit or transfer for a lot of the energy that's coming from the arm. So when I'm activating a sound, I will tend to activate it from my largest muscles. Now in this case, I'm allowing the weight to feel the relationship of the string directly. The elbow is relaxed, the arm is relaxed, and the weight is flowing through the wrist and the fingers and the palm in through the bow into the contact point. So for a basic stroke, I want to feel as easy as possible. When I talk to my students, I'm saying, make contact with your village idiot. It should be that simple. Now, as we go faster than this, then we start having to use the large muscles for beginnings of sets of pitches. So if we're doing, this is fine for one at a time, but so now what I'm doing is I'm activating a bigger motion for the principal note and smaller motions for that. When we go faster yet, I'm still using the elbow for the big motion, but I'll do 4, and some of that is coming from a little bit of motion with the wrist and the fingers. The whole idea is to sort of find what's going to feel comfortable. Hope that answers your question. And the next.
Okay. Do you have any great anecdotes about other musicians / cellists? Any greenhouse stories in particular?
Any greenhouse stories? Well, I studied with Bernard Greenhouse at Sarasota in 1969, and I learned a tremendous amount from him, and I found him a very, very warm, wonderful man. When they asked for what repertoire we wanted to study, all the teaching was done in masterclass format, and so I put down that I wanted to study the Elliott Sonata, a work that Bernard Greenhouse did the first performance of that work. He was so surprised to see that on the repertoire list, and he said, you know, let's not do this in the master class. I'd rather work with you privately on this. So I was able to get a lot of his insights on this just as I was learning for the very first time. And I felt very privileged that he felt so, that it was such an important work, and he cared so deeply about it that he wanted to give me work privately on that. But in those classes, I learned a lot about exactly the things I was just talking about sitting up straight, about how he activated a really beautiful released sound, the cello ringing, what he was doing with his vibrato, which was always so beautiful. And of course, then I wanted to study with him. So he worked out a date for me to come to his apartment in New York, and I would play for him live, and it was, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, and my parents were living in Connecticut, and so I got up very early and got all dressed up and got on the train and went down to New York City and got to his apartment about 25 minutes early because I didn't want to be late. And so I waited down in the street, and then about 10 minutes before my time, I went into his and stood outside of his apartment for about 10 minutes, and there were all these people who were coming and going to work, and they thought it was very funny, like, why are you standing outside the door? And then I waited, and I looked at the time, and 9 o'clock came, and I knocked on the door, and there was no answer, and I was waiting, and so I said, well, I'll knock again, and I knocked on the door, and then I heard some scurrying around, and then I waited for a little bit, and then I knocked on the door again, and then the door opened with a chain, and Mrs. Greenhouse looked out and said, yes? And I said, oh, I'm here to play an audition for Mr. Greenhouse. She says, oh, okay, just a minute. And so she closed the door, and she came back. I think she put her robe on, and she came out, and she said, you can warm up in the dining room. And I came in there, and I saw lots of scurrying around. I think Bernie forgot that I was actually coming. And, and so, of course, warming up in the dining room when I knew he could already hear me, it was like the audition was already going on. I felt incredibly self-conscious, and I got more and more nervous. And when he came in, I was so self-conscious, I felt like I could hardly play. And I was playing Bach Sixth Suite and Suite Italienne, Beethoven A Major, Haydn C Major Concerto, and I felt so uncomfortable. And he looked at me and he said, you know, you have no reason to be nervous. It's when you have recorded the entire repertoire and your entire audience is expecting you to sound even better than your best recordings. That's when you should be nervous. Right now you have nothing to lose. And I thought, well, that's a very interesting perspective. And then years later, when I was in the Concord Quartet and we did the Schubert Cello Quintet with Bernie a couple of times, and it was a wonderful connection to relive those times again with him. I have very, very warm feelings for him and saw him on many, many occasions after that. So, next question.
Would you share any suggestions on how to improve projection of sound?
Well, projection of sound is an interesting psychological issue because the way I define projection is actually making what you're doing so compelling that people have to listen to it. If you think about the idea of a cellist playing in front of an orchestra, there's absolutely no way that the cellist can play louder than the orchestra. So it's not going to be a competition about how loudly you're playing, but more about what you're doing and how amazing it is, how the energy is focused, what you're doing with the music making. Having said that, of course, you have to have enough resonance in your playing that you can be heard. So I keep thinking about having a healthy relationship to resonance and not trying to play so loudly as to play with a compelling energy. So, in terms of projection of sound, having a really clear tone, clear relationship with that, a compelling resonance, and then letting your left hand really catch that sound and get it over there. Having a good cello podium is also a great help when you're playing a concerto.
Can you also talk about staccato?
Staccato. Okay, so staccato short strokes are, and you'll see this about me. Whenever I start to talk about a new issue, I like to go from the largest issue and work one way down. Now, a staccato stroke is a short stroke, but it's derived itself from the long tone, and so the stroke shape that's appropriate for that would be true if you're talking about an uppo staccato or downpo staccato. Trying to make sure that you're getting a good resonant sound on all that sort of stuff, or just a staccato. How to do that? I just play a small part of the long tone. So what I would say is that you are catching the string and releasing and preparing the next note that you're going to play. If you notice what I'm doing, as soon as I stop the bow, I'm preparing to go the opposite direction, and the finger falls and is ready, so it's all released. And so in terms of staccato specifically, that's what I would say about that.
Okay. Can you share your techniques for a great vibrato? And another person also wants to know how you get a flexible, controlled vibrato.
Yes, okay, vibrato, going from the large picture, of course, is a way of catching the resonance and getting a good pulsation in the sound. So I tend to think about the rhythmic aspects of both the bow, in terms of the bow speed and control of that, and how that relates to specifically what we're doing with pulsation of the vibrato. So getting an even pulsation is very important. Now, if you're a good way to do this in terms of playing with a rhythm, I would tend to, let's try, I'll show you with the metronome what I would do. Okay, so it's about 56. And so sometimes what I do is turn the cello to the side and play in fourth position. Let's say we'll do it with second finger. And I'll do one pulsation per beat. I'll start with that. I find it better to actually vocalize it first. Whoa, 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 whoa. So I sort of feel like my arm is throwing it. Now two. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Oops, sorry. That's why I have to do this first, because I don't want to get ahead. Whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know, can you hear it? I hope you can hear the difference in the rhythm. And in each case, my arm is sort of relaxed and I'm sort of throwing the motion a little bit like I'm doing this. like, whoo, hi. But I'm sort of throwing the position and finding that as it's hitting this. So now that's in terms of developing a rhythm and a relaxed spin on that. Of course, finding the right, just a second, I'll turn off the metronome. Trying to find a good place in the pad that's going to surround the string and activate how you can hear the pulsation is going to be an important part of that, really finding that and moving. And then, of course, you do this from finger to finger as well.
Okay. Next question. Do you have any tips for formal professionals who have been away from the instrument but want to pick it up again and practice more seriously?
Former professionals that have let it go a little bit and then coming back. Well, God bless you. It's great. And what I would say is, first of all, you've got a muscle memory in there, if you were a professional before, that could be, very powerful in terms of just getting it activated again. Hopefully you had good habits when you were playing, and that you'd be able to do that. If not, this would be a good chance for you to be able to rectify some of those things and bring them back. Playing things that you love to play, and simple things, that sort of stuff. I would probably always try to get a companion, play sonatas, play chamber music, be able to get yourself back to that. Sometimes when you're playing in a quartet, even simple things that you're more interested in what's going on than being sort of self-aware of these things. Making a little list in terms of stepwise motion of things that you might want to be able to do, so that by the end, each week you have some additional thing that you want to add to the routine. Starting slow, adding up. I think that all that stuff just sort of makes basic sense.
Can you please talk about spiccato?
Spiccato.
Yes.
Okay. So I talked about this a little bit last week, and the spiccato is the same thing as we were talking about with staccato. It's a part of the long tone. So the point is to be able, I was talking about this, and if you remember, well, maybe some of you weren't here last week, so it's describing it as like a basketball dribble, where the ball hits the floor, and then there's a spring in the ball, and it comes back into the hand, and you're able to keep the ball going. And while you're dribbling it, then if you want to travel with it, then there's a kind of a lateral motion that happens. A similar kind of a thing in terms of how the bow bounces. Instead of it's being a floor, which is springs back, the string itself bounces back, and the bow itself bounces, and you're sort of able to try to find how that's going to work for you. So sometimes we want to find how the bow will bounce on its own by just letting it drop down like this. This would be the same thing if we dropped a basketball on the floor. See what it would do. Finding good ways to do that. And then a jeté stroke as you're sort of letting the bow drop and travel a little bit. And then if you do a jeté stroke, or just drop the bow and then come back on the next, instead of you go. This is sort of a drop spiccato. Try to keep that going. So that I'm sort of trying to keep dropping that. Then there's also a spiccato that's basically from the string, and I think if you're basketball players, you can actually do that, where you have a ball on the floor and you can try to get it to dribble up. So that would be. Now what I'm doing here is trying to activate from that. It's basically, in order to get it to bounce, we have to have some verticality in it. In order to make it make a tone, we have to have some sort of horizontal into it. So the diagonal motion is what makes it sound, the stroke. it's I would try to find good understanding about where the balance place in your bow is, because that's also very important. So my balance place is here for my bow. You can find that doing the same kind of thing. Sometimes I mark it with a pencil on the bow just to remind me of where that is. So right here. Now if I try to bounce right at the balance point, it doesn't seem like that works very well for the string tension. However, you can find as the string is less resistant, the string is thinner, you can go a little further away from the balance point and find that sweet spot, which would be right here. So that's about this far from the balance point. The D string might be here. And the G string would be a little closer. And C string would be right around where we'd want. And of course that has to do a little bit with what you want. If you get below the balance point, you wind up having to try to do the whole stroke and you wear your arm out. Okay, James.
Okay. How do you play fast passages cleanly with separate bow in a good tone like the ones from the Haydn concertos? So maybe like the rondo last movements.
Play with a good tone.
Separate bow, clean, fast. So
Clean
cleanly.
and fast, right.
Fast.
Okay, so it has to be very coordinated. And you want to know some very basic information. So if you're talking about just, if I were doing this kind of order, so I would start slowly and make a really nice sound, stay absolutely straight in the string, and sort of pay attention to the stroke shape on every note. Now what will be the variables? The variables will be the string crossings and the shifts. So it's helpful for me to know that if I start the first note of this up bow, the string crossing will be on down bow. When I'm thinking about that, I might actually, in my music, when I'm doing it, write that bowing in to remind me to do that. Then, and sort of be able to do that. It's all part of the character of the sound and this sort of stuff. But I mean, so you want to know what those variables are in terms of how to be able to make your coordination better. So that's what I would do. It's just sort of make sure you know the bowing, go through it slowly, find the way in which you can allow the bow to do the work, and try to be as relaxed as possible. Be calm when you're practicing, and a little bit slower.
Do you have any tips to create an effortlessly rich sound while keeping a straight bow?
Oh, well, straight bow is part of making a rich sound, right? And so you want to be, oh, that's so great, because it's sort of like what gives you the greatest pleasure is playing this gorgeous resonant sound, right? So, oh man, that's like the core of everything, isn't it? So, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about E minor Brahms, maybe, right? Something like so. About with this right now is the actual inner rhythm of the long notes and how the bow is supporting the rhythmic infrastructure with the bow speed, and that if I want to flare the line, it opens the bow just a little bit more. There's a kind of a harmony then also in the rhythmicity of what's going on with the left hand. So I don't know how many pulsations I did with the vibrato, and then sort of connecting these things to the two parts of that makes sense. That'll be very different than so it's that. What are other great things about the cello repertoire making a really, really rich sound? Finding the right sort of character or quality, or so it's always going to be from the whole point of view, not playing with pressure, but playing with support and weight. If you're playing with pressure, something you come on the top of it and it doesn't allow the string to really ring. I tend to feel like I'm almost playing behind the cello. It allows the bow to ring, and the cello to ring a little better, feeling this natural resonance and get that if I play with a bow that's not straight. It's going to sound a little fuzzy. James?
I recently switched to gut strings.
Yeah.
And staccato feels a bit more difficult. Is there something I can do? Is there something I can do differently?
Gee, I wish I had my gut string cello here to try to work on that with you a little bit. Of course, what you're finding is that the gut string responds differently than the steel string, and it'll be a little bit slower. And my memory from my gut days is that I had to be a little bit more on with my spiccato. Didn't like a dropped spiccato, and that I wanted to make sure that something about a more complex kind of stroke shape in gut playing is important. And see, I would say that most of the gut playing that I have done professionally has been not things with spiccato, but mostly things with different kinds of bow speeds. So, for example, if I'm playing with a Baroque bow, I play those things with bow speed and really flashy in terms of what's going on with the bow. But if you're playing modern rep with gut, I'm not really sure. I might relax the tension on your bow so it has a little bit more cushion in it. So you just turn the bow down a little bit and see if it grabs the string a little bit better. It's a little bit hard without our having the tools here to be able to experiment with that idea. I hope that's helpful.
Do you have any tips and tricks for increasing the tempo, so working towards being able to play faster?
Yes. So when you're thinking about playing faster, I have one statement. The enemy of velocity is resistance. There are two types of resistance: mental resistance and physical resistance. And so so I always start with the mental part of this. So let's say that you're playing trying to think of an example of this. How about this? Beethoven String Quartet, and it's fancy and it's very fast. Now, if I'm practicing it slowly, let's say I'm doing this. Now, my technique is designed for that speed now. Now, if I don't adjust my technique and my mental conditioning to that, I won't be able to allow it to go faster. So if I try then... Now that's the technique that I was using slower. It's getting tighter. So what I want to do is I want to be reducing resistance mentally. So instead of doing one note at a time, I'll do 2 notes or 4 notes at a time. And so I might do... So at each level, I'd make a larger group of notes that I can take for granted and try to make that also a little bit easier in terms of what I'm doing with the left hand. Hopefully the precision of the slow work can translate to a slightly faster firing on that. As you just saw, as I was sitting here trying to work out this problem, I was having certain problems making the string crossing and do that. So I would want to make sure that I would have a little bit of a mental drop at that point to make sure I had control of the string crossing.
This is for the Schumann concerto. In the first movement, he seems to have some trouble playing the arpeggios relaxed and in tune, and then in the third movement, it's difficult to play the jumps and nail those in tune as well. In the first arpeggios in the Schumann, I tend to think of them as a sextuplet, with one sextuplet being tucked in and the other one flaring out. So then I would do... And what I do with that is so the bow speed increase helps me with the shift, and also allows the flare at the end of the run to work. The same kind of thing with the D major arpeggio. Bow speed is a huge issue for me. I spend a lot of time thinking about it because I feel that the variation with that helps a lot with creating density, tucking things, spreading sounds, and has a lot to do with projection and clarity and of course the emotional spread of things like that. So on those first arpeggios, that's how I do them. In the leaps at the beginning of the last movement, I spend quite a bit about and sort of try to find my ability to sort of say my A is here, and then here's the F, and there's the A, and I try to memorize just what that feels like on those things. I spend a little bit of time mapping those things out, and it feels a little bit better. I think those are the two places you're probably talking about. It's not so different from Haydn D major concerto, where we have to know where the F sharp is. We wind up about playing this F sharp about 50 times, and we really need to know where that is. So I tend to think of this as a compound situation where you're putting your first finger on the D, and a major third above that is a good way of being able to find that. So it's, some of these things, it's just a question about finding a compound way of finding these intervals and feeling confident about it?
Let's see. I'm having trouble with the accuracy of playing in the higher register, so for intonation. I find it difficult playing above first position. So
Yeah, okay. Well, you know what this is like? It's like neighborhoods. You know, you're driving around neighborhoods, you need a map. And if you feel really comfortable just around your own house, you're not going to be able to go anywhere terribly much. So, and I remember when I was a kid, I felt sort of comfortable in fourth position and first position. And so sometimes I would play the most ridiculous fingerings because I didn't feel really comfortable with doing that. So what do you want to do? You want to be able to, it's always learning by association and patterns of association. So if you feel comfortable with a G in first position, because you feel comfortable with a G in third position, being able to find G here, that's related to what? Well, your so in third position already you would start to say, well, that G is here, and now my B flat would be here. In extended position, I'd have B natural here. Now, what other notes do I have that are related to that? Even though so similarly, of course, in fourth position, obviously you probably have been put your thumb on harmonic A or D. Now this is a comfortable position actually. In some ways this is a more comfortable position than playing in first position. And so your arms are sort of in more relaxed places. And so you sort of say, okay, if I have harmonics here, what are all the things you play in just an octave higher, sort of start to figure out what kinds of things could you play. So you have now in this particular case, when we're playing in the thumb position, it's a little more like violin fingering, because we have to be able to absorb half steps a little differently than we do in first position. A half step is basically a finger or some sort of a distance between that. So we have to understand how the positions are done a little bit differently. The Starker organized method of string playing is a great way to go through positions, and you sort of mapped out in the four-finger positions, three-finger positions, thumb positions, and the different configurations of this. It's a good way, it's basically studying the map of the cello, so you can start to feel these are different neighborhoods and you can feel comfortable in them. And then the question is, when you're playing a piece of music, is how do you connect the neighborhoods for a smooth journey and a smooth transition from one to the next? In which case, once you know the positions, then the question is feeling comfortable shifting between neighborhoods, essentially. And be able to go and find comfortable ways to do that. So hopefully, you know, it takes a little time to feel comfortable, but you want to make sure that when you're in a new neighborhood that you don't develop stress, physical stress, while you're doing that. We've got time for one more, I think.
Okay. Any practice tips for the descending triplets in the Saint-Saëns Concerto second movement in A minor?
Second movement. Is that I assume, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so well, knowing what your basic hand configuration is, and what I do is, again, I think about the bowing that I need to be thinking about before for the string crossing. So
each case, I'm making sure that the string crossing is right. And so I'm almost thinking about it as a 3/4, ba da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. But I want to inflect it, thinking about it at 3/4 for my coordination, but I play it in 6/8 in terms of what I do with the music. And then the question is, can you effectively hear the half steps? And that's a question about the same thing we were talking about with intonation before, as to be able to get down. So you could do also play an octave. And so down in a lower position, you might be able to feel a little bit more comfortable about learning how to hear it, and then you want to transfer that knowledge when you go up, or play that on the piano. I think our time is up, but before we leave, since this is the last cello chat before the holidays, I wanted to encourage you to donate to CelloBello. I mean, after all, your donations make all the online resources possible from CelloBello. And, for example, you get cool things like pencil, or a great book bag, the kind of thing that you can carry all the Boccherini sonatas in very comfortably. And you see that here. I've got my Boccherini sonatas in the book bag. It's great. CelloBello.com. And I even have my CelloBello t-shirt. I'm a model. Right? And with that, I wish you all happy holidays and have a great practicing, and hopefully we'll see you next year sometime. Take care.